One thing about kit building is that you've got to paint the models yourself. Now, a 16-ton mineral wagon, let's be honest, it's not an exciting paint job, it's grey. But the tricky bit is all the wagon labels and the numbers and everything, and even the line on the side. Now, one way round dealing with this is to do a little trick that I used to do on my models, and that is simply to put the black patches on with a brush and then blob the letters on about right. And if you sort of half think about what they're supposed to be saying, the blobs look about the right shape. If you want to be really sophisticated, you can use a mapping pen and some white ink, but they're never going to be quite as neat as a proper transfer. Now this, to be fair, I got away with this for many, many years, and you know what? Hardly anybody noticed. But don't tell anybody, because that's our secret. What I'm actually going to do now, though, is looking at the Parkside kits, now they've been taken over, they come with water slide transfers. I don't have to go looking for transfers. I don't have to buy extra packs of them anymore. The kits come with enough for about 3 wagons worth. So that's very, very generous. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what is a water slide transfer, Phil? Well, let's imagine this is our wagon side. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply a transfer to it. The way the transfer arrives is it's printed on a backing sheet of paper. And then there is a slightly thicker, and bearing in mind these are massively magnified, my props here, a slightly thicker transfer sheet. And on top of that, you've got whatever picture you want. This particularly attractive cartoon of me. And then on top of that, there is another very, very thin layer of almost a varnish material. But it will arrive stuck to the backing sheet like this. And same principle actually, you know, those of you who have ever built an Airfix Spitfire, for example, you'll have put the roundels on in exactly the same way. What you do, put it in a bath of water. This will float off, or at least it will separate from the transfer, and then you put the transfer on the model, dab it with a paper towel, job done. That's the theory. In practice, your wagon side's probably not this smooth. If you look at it at microscopic level, if you've painted it with matte paint, it's really bumpy. Now this is a real microscopic level, but the reason that the matte paint is matte is that when light comes in from here, instead of being reflected straight back out, which is what makes it look gloss, or reflected nearly out, which makes it look satin, the light comes in, bounces off in that direction. Light comes from that direction, bounces off in that direction, because the paint is at a microscopic level very, very bumpy. And the problem with that is that when you put your transfer on top, you trap air underneath. And that can lead to an effect called silvering. You put the transfer on and suddenly you can see little bits of silver colour underneath your transfer, which really doesn't look right on a model. Sometimes you can bodge it by really heavily weathering it, and you can hide the worst of it, but then you probably didn't need to put the transfer on in the first place. So all these little pockets of air caught underneath your transfer affect the way that it sits on the model, which is why a lot of the time the advice you're given is to paint that with a gloss varnish. Just spray some gloss varnish over it so that you get a nice flat surface. That's what the gloss looks like. Your transfer sits on top, there's no air trapped underneath, and you don't get any silvering. Then you'll probably need to matte varnish it afterwards, but that's easy to do once the transfer's on, and very often you're advised to matte varnish transfers anyway to protect them from handling. I have a wagon side here, and I've actually, although this is matte painted, it's number 64 again, as I've said, I've actually painted some gloss varnish over this. This is Humbrol Clear. I've just given it a light coat. I don't need to go completely matte. It doesn't need to be a high gloss. If it is a high gloss, the transfer will stick really, really well. But to be honest, that's a bit of a faff with rail models. It's fine if you're doing a model car or something where you want a high gloss finish. Here, a little bit of gloss will just hopefully save me from silvering. Tools required are the transfer sheet, a sharp knife to remove the transfer from the sheet, and it's a water slide transfer. I'm going to need some water. I'm using perfectly ordinary tap water here. Some people like to put a drop of washing up liquid in it. I'm also going to have some tweezers handy, and a small paintbrush, and also some cocktail sticks. Basically, putting transfers on the side of wagons is not on things is not my favouriteest of job, because you put it on and you've got to make sure you poke it into position. So you've got to have lots of tools handy while it's wet to do the poking and prodding. And then finally, you want a bit of kitchen towel to just dry the transfer off. You can use something like Decal Fix or some of the Microsol products to soften the transfer if it's sitting over some detail, or really, you know, it just softens the transfer material itself. Hopefully I'm not going to need that, but I've got some handy in case I do later on. Okay. Right, first job, cut around the transfer. Now, a lot of the transfers will have excess transfer around them, for want of a better word, the carrier film, and there is some argument for cutting really, really close. On this one, I can see that the carrier film actually does cover the entire sheet, so the closer I can cut to the transfer, the better, because the carrier film, the clear carrier film, is actually what you tend to see. I'm going to trim nice and close on this one, but I'm not going to worry about it being absolutely perfect, because this wagon is going to get itself weathered. Right, next, take your transfer and give it a nice bath. Okay, now this one's had a little bit of a bath now, and I can just see that it's moving on the backing sheet. So what I'll do is put the backing sheet onto the wagon, gently pull it away with the tweezers, and then poke the transfer into position. And I'm trying not to get too much water underneath, because I want it to stay put while it dries. Okay, I think that looks about right there. Now what I'll do is I will just gently pad that, and then double check again that the thing hasn't moved. It certainly is likely to. Not got too much water underneath here, it's less likely to move. If you've got a lot of water under there, just put a corner of the kitchen towel in. Just that will wick the water away from it, and you'll end up with it sticking right to the side. And there we go. Again, I try not to poke it with the tweezers because they're metal. Ideally, I'll move it around with the wet brush. Just less, again, it's less likely to damage the transfer, and it's less likely to buckle it. You can smooth transfers out, it's just a pain in the backside to do it. It's not quite square. You do get some interesting stuff on these sheets. Those white lines are normally applied diagonally to the wagon, and they indicate where the end loading door is. Somebody has very generously put them on this sheet, which is for the cupboard door style wagon, which doesn't actually have any end doors on, so those are spare. Always keep transfers, keep them on the backing sheet, keep them in a bit of plastic, and build up a little stock of spare ones. They're always worth having, because you never know either when you're going to ruin one, or when you can when you need an extra one for a project. Anyway, look at that. That is perfectly legible. You can read the writing on there. Water slide transfers. A little bit of practice, and you'll find yourself getting really good at this and really confident. Start with a wagon, move on to a loco.